Yeah, that would be my first claim, officer. That's what they really want to do. They want to get people who are violating the civil law of being here legally. And it doesn't, all the other stuff we can say, but it doesn't really matter because they're not supposed to be here. So unless you want to have a nation without borders, immigration is beautiful. It's wonderful. It's one of the best principles of this country. But law and order is extremely important. And this is what opens the door for us to have terrorist attacks in this nation. We can't just have people here legally. Their interests may not be aligned with ours. It just opens the door for so much negativity.
Yeah, so your first claim from earlier, because I know we're talking in the comments, good or bad, I won't really make a subjective argument. I would say that ICE's civil authority to remove people that are here unlawfully is fine. Their tactics are not making their community safer. I think there's plenty of evidence to observe this. My claim would be that their tactics are in violation of our civil rights, and I would never argue that citizens should concede their rights for the objectives of the government. The government has to work around our rights in order to effectuate its goals. And I guess we can kind of dive in from there.
We absolutely can. We can take it on a case by case basis. But overall, when people think that their quote unquote rights are being violated, usually it's because they are under the impression that they're not either getting a due process or they think that their protest is valid. But there are stipulations under every protest. And which one are you referring to in particular? Which right is being violated when a U.S. citizen is getting detained by ICE? What method does ICE use? Are you saying that isn't making the community safe?
Yeah, so I think I would start off with like there's okay, so the most recent court case is Gibson v. Bondi out of Minneapolis. January 15th, Judge Bryan ruled that ICE cannot enter forcibly a residence without a judicial warrant because it violates the Fourth Amendment. ICE entered the home forcibly with an administrative warrant, an I-205 form. There is usually removal orders attached to that. However, it does not overcome the breaching of a premises. They still have to have a search warrant in order to do so. There's been other cases. For example, we can look at Sarah Ellis out of Operation Midway Blitz. We had Greg Bovino, and I will mention he lied in deposition when he swore that he did not misuse force against peaceful protesters. Greg Bovino later admits to Sarah Ellis that he lied after she confronts him after reviewing his body cam footage, where he misused force against peaceful protesters and then tried to retroactively claim that they assaulted him, which they never did. So I would argue those are all rights that are being violated in support of the fast tracking the goal of deportations. Again, my claim: ICE has a right to deport people, and so does CBP, but they don't have a right to violate the civil rights of Americans, which I think is making our country a significantly more dangerous place because it's creating protests.
Well, yeah, the only right you just mentioned was the right to not have unlawful seizure, unlawful breaching of your
And
home right,
protest.
and stopping the protest. Now, the protest very nuanced because when we talk about due process, it's certain people under certain circumstances. So due process looks different for a lot of people. And when you're already in violation of civil law, like standing in the middle of the street, or you're already in violation of civil law, like disturbing the peace, and you're going directly against the order, the lawful order from a federal agent, that's when due process starts to kick in. So after that, your due process is you're going to get apprehended. You're going to get detained. And when you don't comply, all your rights go out the window. The entailment of your argument is, hey, it doesn't matter who's trying to detain me. It doesn't matter what federal agency is trying to investigate here or try to detain anyone. We can respond because our rights are getting violated with violence. We can respond by protesting and impeding every investigation that they have. And this is exactly what the radical fat white lesbian did. And that's exactly why they answered the way they did. You're not allowed to sit here and try to run over a federal officer. That's completely insane. The rhetoric that everybody's spreading about violating human
Wait,
rights
wait, wait,
is
really quick. I want to slow down the conversation. If we're going to talk about a particular incident, that's fine, but we have to stay on that incident and just handle that incident. So, like, if I want to talk about,
named like three incidents, sir.
No, no, no,
I
well,
haven't named a single one.
hold on. So, if I did that to you, I apologize. You asked me to cite,
Yes, you named two
you,
cases and then you
well,
named the victim.
I know, but that was to substantiate the claim that I made about civil rights violations. You asked for evidence. I provided you two judges and two court cases. But is there an incident? But go ahead. I see what you're saying. I'm saying if you want to hammer on an incident, just let me know and we can stick
No,
on it.
absolutely not. Every
Okay,
incident
go
is
ahead.
going to fall under the same. Every incident falls under the same jurisdiction of this conversation. I promise you, because every incident, no one's rights were violated. Every incident was met with certain circumstances because each incident they were going directly against the authority of the federal agency. And this is where the rhetoric that the left is spreading that the rights are being violated is incredibly crucial to the integrity of what ICE is trying to accomplish, which is their bottom goal of getting people out of the country who aren't supposed to be here. So when we talk about people's rights being violated because ICE is breaking into their house, and you already said they had an order of removal anyway, yes, go remove them. And the entailment to your argument is no. Just let them stay wherever they want to stay and don't do anything. Just try to hold their hand and hug them and ask them nicely to leave the country. It's not going to work that way.
So I'm going to respond. That's post hoc. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the removal orders are valid, but they have to have a search warrant to enter a residence. That's been long held, even for people who are here undocumented. And there's plenty of court cases that can be cited that would give credence to that. The other thing I would say is that the right to protest is actually absolute and the right to demonstrate. And whether or not they're demonstrating by being in the street or not is not inherently illegal. This is why federal courts have held that the police believe that something is illegal or creating an obstruction. They must give dispersal orders and they must announce that the gathering is unlawful. Correct. So the issue again I'm having with ICE is that ICE continues to, for example, use force against citizens without creating formal arrest or simply demanding identification without probable cause or reasonable suspicion, rendering reasons utilizing strictly ethnicity, accent, or location. They did this, by the way, with the collateral arrest, which again was struck down by Sarah Ellis and also struck down by Judge Carl Brown in Colorado. The ability to detain people for prolonged periods of time for simply existing in an area where other people were being arrested was illegal because we've held for a long time in this country, and ICE knows this through the Casanova consent decree, that you must develop reasonable suspicion per individual. The other issue I would have is, according to the Davis case of 2001, Matthew v. Diaz of the 1970s, the due process claims is all persons. So I'll end here and I'll let you go and respond. But when it comes to entering residences, it is all persons. So even if they're undocumented or illegal with removal orders, they have always been considered as all persons. And thus, specifically in the Davis case, you have to have a search warrant to enter into the residence of a citizen who has an illegal within their home, or the actual residence of an illegal. The deportation order does not vacate them of those rights.
Right now, I'm going to contend with all protests are absolute, because I feel like you don't actually mean that, do you, officer?
That's not what I said, though. What I said was that protest is a right, and law enforcement can deem it illegal, but they have to give dispersal orders and make that deeming of illegality known
The word
to
I heard was
protesters.
absolute.
Well, the right to protest is absolute. No, that is an absolute right. We have a right to protest and demonstrate, yes. But how we do that is not absolute. You can't walk into a private business, like the church, for example, and announce your demonstration there. But if they're in the streets, the courts have never been clear on, is being in the street illegal? It's not. If they're blocking traffic, it could be called illegal, and law enforcement can advise them of that, and they can be dispersed. But again, that lies on law enforcement to make those claims and then to give those orders. If they don't, then you could be violating rights. This is what we saw actually with the Greg Bovino case coming out of Operation Away Blitz with Sarah Ellis. That was actually the exact challenge that was given.
Yeah, so just to be clear, there are protests that are unlawful, correct?
They could become riots. Yes, yeah, they become riots or unlawful. Correct. Yeah.
And what's mainly a contention here is violating the right to protest. That's what you're claiming ICE is doing.
I'm claiming that ICE has. We have seen and known ICE per court documents to do that. Yes.
And this is why I'm demonstrating that they're not violating anyone's right to protest. The only thing they're violating right now is civil unrest. Because if it wasn't for the rhetoric like, hey, they're tyrannical, hey, they're evil, hey, they're violating your rights, I really don't think that a majority of the people that are out here impeding all these investigations would be out there. So when we have videos of ICE officers yelling at the people that are spitting on them, blowing whistles, throwing snowballs, and they say, hey, you guys know we're here to get a P3 deal, right? Because this is what the CTEL does. They traffic children. So ICE is investigating people that are doing things like that. And then they get people that stand in the middle of the street while cars are driving and yell at them and start pushing them. So when we say they're violating people's right to protest, are they really protesting, or are they impeding an investigation?
I want to have a point.
That's exactly what. I'm glad you brought up the case about people going into a church, because people say that they're protesting. They're really not. All they're doing is impeding investigations and disturbing the peace.
Yeah, point of inquiry though, and then I want to have a response. But I just want to volley you a question really quick. You can't, because it sounds like you made a definitive statement. I'm going to give a moment for you to recant or readjust that position. You can't say that they're not doing a thing when federal judges have ruled that they are doing the thing, and the appellate court agreed with the factual find they were doing the thing. So if Sarah Ellis says they were crushing peaceful protests, crushing is my own term I'm using, not hers, and they lied to me about it, but here's my factual findings, and the appellate court agrees, you can't then say they're not doing the thing. So do you want to adjust your statement, or do you want to remain with your position?
You're ready to concede that the criminal justice system in every court gets everything 100% correct.
Not doing the thing. So do you want to adjust your statement?
Ready to concede that the criminal justice system in every court gets everything 100% correct, because they get stuff wrong.
I would not concede that. What I would volley back to
the criminal justice gets everything correct all the time.
I would not. That would not be an appropriate argument. But the appropriate argument is we have a appellate system,
Is it possible
and they went through the. It is possible, but okay, hold on. This is where I would say I will make the plea, because we're discussing legality. You're not equipped to make the argument that they were wrong. You're just not. It would have to be the Supreme Court or another authority. But the issue is, you made a claim in this debate that it wasn't happening. I'm arguing you can't make that claim factually, because factually speaking, as of right now, it is and did happen, and it's continues to happen.
There's not a lot of facts when it comes to protests, because they're so open to interpretation, officer. What do you mean? I'm just saying
I would
every
argue
single
though
right that you're trying to demonstrate that it was a lawful, peaceful protest and everyone's rights were violated when ICE came in and started telling people to calm down.
I didn't say everyone.
Disturbing the peace.
Wait, hold on. Please don't do that to me. I didn't say everyone. I'm giving specifics. I'm trying to be as specific as possible. My argument is, you can't rebuttal me and say it's not happening. You can think that your opinions are fine, but I'm gonna have to lean in and say, well, but we have multiple federal judges from different regions of the country, north, south, east, and west, all alike. Some of them left, some of them right, some of them Obama appointed, some of them Trump appointed, and they're all saying that they are finding violations where peaceful protests are being met with chemical irritants and force. And I'm telling you that would be a violation of our civil rights to demonstrate. If it's a peaceful protest, the cops, watch say the police, and law enforcement as a whole are unauthorized to use force per the law. So I'm giving you the chance to recant in honesty of the debate, because you can't make a claim that you also cannot substantiate. That's not fair. I can't argue with that.
You're not really arguing with me making a false claim, because I disagree with the findings of it. This is why I asked the qualifying question. Do they get everything 100% correct, officer? Because there was a point in time where federal judges and the entire government thought that some people could be considered 3/5 of a human being. Okay? Mm-hmm. So I can say that I think they got it wrong. And
but you need to demonstrate that through judicial review, though, because we reached the conclusion that people are not 3/5 of a person through judicial review of the Constitution and the law. But what you're telling me is, in your opinion, with no review, that what the judges are saying is wrong. And I just can't accept that. And we can move on, but I'm going to count that as a point, because you can't make claims you can't support or substantiate. We can move on, though.
Yes, I am trying to substantiate the claim that all of these protests are impeding investigations and they're leading to civil unrest.
Can you prove that all of them? Where would you get that evidence from? All of them are doing this. Where do you get the evidence for that?
The evidence for me would be statements from ICE themselves.
Okay, but okay, and I'll meet you
And
here.
hold up,
I'll meet you.
also
I'll
my
meet
evidence,
you.
hold up real quick.
Go ahead. Sorry.
My evidence would also be ISIS response.
I will meet you here then. Okay. I'm gonna provide a scenario, and we can work with it for a second. An officer tases a man and says, well, from my perspective, he was violent. And so my response was force. Map this onto what you just said. ICE is perceiving the protest as something, and the response is force. But when the officer goes to court, if a judge or an attorney says your force is actually illegal, this is why we have terms like excessive force, abusive force. Uh, ICE can fall into the exact same category. They can perceive whatever they want. Their response can be whatever they want it to be. But underneath judicial review, if they fail, and then with the appellate court, if they disagree with the lower court decision, if they fail to rebut the factual findings at a higher tier court system, which the appellate court is kind of the last stop shop, unless you're going to go SCOTUS level, but most things don't, then law enforcement's wrong. They're wrong. They don't have a leg to stand on. We've exhausted the legal process. That's why I'm saying to you, your thoughts are fine on this. However, ICE has lost numerous court cases in all regions of the country on the excessive use of force against peaceful protesters. They've lost at the judicial, they've lost at the federal level, with the lower court, district level, and with the appellate court, regional level. And so my claim is you can't make a claim that all of these protests are obstruction or whatever word you're using, because we know that's not true for the courts. You can't make the claim anymore unless you have another process of judicial review you want to give me where I'm lacking and I don't know the evidence.
You're not lacking. I'm not accusing you of not knowing any evidence, and I'm not invalidating any of your claims. I'm just contending with your points. So if you want to validate that claim, that's fine. The main crux of my argument is still solid. The rhetoric from the left has led to civil unrest. And you can't, as much as you want to tell me, I can't disagree with the decisions that some federal judges make, because that's one of the founding principles of this. Yeah, of course, yeah. That's one of the founding principles of this nation, is to completely disagree and critique the federal government. And this is exactly what everybody's doing in these protests. This is exactly what I'm doing to the federal judges you're talking about. So I will move on from that claim. I'll let you have that, because you're saying just because a judge says something, I'm not allowed to have an opposing opinion. That's what it sounds like you're saying. So I'll move on from that claim and reiterate the rhetoric that the left is spreading is what has led to all this civil unrest. Because if it wasn't for these dangerous words that they're using, like authoritarian and tyrannical, and they're calling them a group of people, with all due respect, the group of people that they're comparing them to have done abhorrent things. And the group of people that they're really trying to apprehend are doing even more abhorrent things. If we take a quick drive down by the border, we'll see what their entailment is, what they actually want to achieve here in this country.
I, I have one rebuttal, and I might want to shift. If you want to go back to this, we can as well. I would argue that where there's riots and violence against officers, like I know an officer got his finger bit off in Minneapolis yesterday, I believe, that is wrong. People should go to jail. That is not helping. It's also not helping, though, when DHS refuses to hold officers accountable. For example, Greg Bovino lied to a federal judge. He's still acting commander. We have no investigations into what is currently happening in Minneapolis, or any investigations into the alleged civil rights violations of ICE and CPD officers, to the point where federal attorneys, Trump appointed, and ICE agents that are over the divisions of investigation have quit in multiple regions of the country, not just Minneapolis or Minnesota. The other issue that I would want to tackle is the claim that ICE is being effective. I don't know if I can agree with that claim. They said they're going to go for criminals. We know per the Cato Institute, and there's somebody else, but I'm just not. I think I'm blanking on who. Transactional record, the track, transactional record. Like a record something clearing. I don't know, I could look it up. But we know, though, that over 70% of the people that have been detained by ICE have no criminal convictions, no criminal record. The only people that are actual criminal offenders or in violation of like moral turpitude laws would be roughly about 6-7%. That was the end of last year. We also know that according to the Center for Immigration Studies, I was just reading this about a day or so ago, that the Kaiser Foundation for New York, they conducted a survey of the databases for the New York Times, and they found that 41% of all the immigrants that have been detained by ICE that are considered to be undocumented, which undocumented does include people who have legal permanent residency, they have legal status because they're compliant with the process, which is per Congress. So I would argue, to land here, ICE is ineffective. We are creating an environment of chaos and disarray in our American streets. We are seeing very little results. We're spending billions of dollars, upwards of 800 for bonuses and other allotments to them, and we have significantly low number turnout for actual violent offenders. We seem to be arresting mostly people who are compliant because we retroactively made their status here illegal. For example, the early canceling of the Somalis with TPS, which violates congressional law about when the president can cancel these things. That'd be my claim on the second one.
Get into there. I'd love to bring up the compliant part. Would you say that it's easier to arrest somebody that's compliant or somebody that's violent?
I think that all depends. I think it's a very subjective
Be
question.
honest.
Well, no, it depends. So, okay, so for example, if I'm here on asylum and I just got out of court and you come to arrest me and I struggle because I'm kind of confused, I would say that person might be resisting arrest, but I don't think they believe they probably don't believe you even have the ability to arrest them because they're compliant with the process. So I don't know what you mean by your question. What do you mean by your question?
You said they are arresting more compliant offenders than violent offenders, correct?
I don't think they're.
You said it, not me.
No, I know what I said. They're not really offenders, though. Like, they're compliant in the process, but the administration has released a policy that they want to reassess everyone, so they're retroactively making them non-compliant by revoking their statuses. So I mean, it's probably easier to go get them.
The question I'm asking right now is it easier to apprehend a compliant criminal than a violent criminal? Which one is easier?
Yes, compliant is much easier. Yes.
Okay, so when you say, hey, they are arresting compliant criminals, good. They need to arrest all of them. But
why are they
arresting less violent criminals and less compliant criminals is because they're not compliant. So it's harder to get them. It's harder to arrest them. That's very fundamental. And as a matter of fact, it's harder to arrest these people that aren't compliant because you know what else they're not doing? They're not going to court. So it's not easier to find them. It's harder to find them. So when we start having these investigations and we start seeing them on the streets acting like this, they wouldn't need to act like this if everybody who was illegal just came out and said, here, I'm going to comply. Come and take me. Does that kind of make sense, officer?
It does not, because my question would be, if these people are complying with the process and per Congress they have legal status, which means they're in good legal standing, to go detain them does not make sense to me. This isn't a good use of time or federal dollars. Now, if the people are uncompliant, like they've been here for 10 years without a work visa and they have no other reason to be here, you can go grab them, that's fine. But that's not what's happening. We're finding out through the numbers that these people are in a compliance status. And this is actually the inquiry of the first congressional hearing around the matter, which is that which is that not Bondi. Is it
So are
Bondi?
you under the impression there are no compliant illegal immigrants here?
No, that would not be my claim.
Okay. So what is easier to apprehend, officer? Who would be apprehended at a higher rate?
I'll try to clarify.
The ones that are complying or the ones that aren't
It's
complying?
easier to put somebody in handcuffs who's willing to go, but I would reject the premise of your question because there isn't a reason to arrest them. That's why they're getting released. That's why the numbers are so
There's no
low
reason to
for
arrest them.
deportation. Yes, because they're compliant with the process. By the process, I mean they're abiding by the laws that were set before them when they came into the country to seek asylum or refugee status or to work. But ICE is arresting them for reevaluation, but that's not legal
Why isn't it?
because it's an act of Congress, not the president.
Excellent. And who does ICE work for?
The president.
Who is the commander in chief?
The president.
So when we say things like this is why I want to say we want to be very careful, because I'm trying to help you out with the entailment of your argument. The entailment of your argument is that no one is going to get apprehended. Everyone that's illegal here is going to stay, and that there's no authority that ICE has over anyone in this country. They're not allowed to storm the streets. They're not allowed to enter anyone's home. They're not allowed to really do anything. The only thing they're capable of doing is deporting the people that come and say, hey, I'm here.
I reject that claim. Underneath Obama, we saw an incredible amount of deportations. The difference is that even though Obama was sued, for example, by the ACLU, it was found that he was being compliant with the law. Congress has oversight. It's similar, like it's all part of like our co-equal branches, right? But the president has execution authority, has the authority to make the rules. So the president can't say, I disagree with the rules, and therefore I'm going to do this instead. That's a breach. And that's actually been the key issue with Congress recently is they're arresting people, again, who are compliant with the process. There's no reason to arrest them. Now, violent people, sure, people who have deportation order removals, sure, but this is also leading to low numbers for the administration. Most of the people that have, most of the numbers we see, those are self-deportations, those people who left, and Obama had a lot of that too. These are all self-deportations. So I would say, no, I think ICE should have the authority to do their job. I supported it with Obama, I supported it with Biden. I don't support it now, but it's because they're flying in the face of the American people. And by that I mean, like one of your examples, yes, they cannot enter your home without a judicial warrant. Yes. That might be annoying, but that's just the law. It's built on law. I don't know how to overcome that with a memo.
Well, you don't really overcome it with a memo, and you don't overcome illegal immigration by the tactics you think are going to work. And these self-deportations wouldn't have never happened if ICE didn't exert their authority and show everyone that they actually do have the legal right to carry out every single one of these mass sweeps that they've done. So what you're really contending with is the mass sweeps, because the mass sweeps are when you're seeing them forcibly break into people's homes. The mass sweeps are when you're seeing people out on the street protesting them and ICE responding, in fact. So when they're out there and there's a protest of people and they're trying to conduct an investigation. They're under the impression that the people are there protesting to stop them from carrying out that investigation. The goal of these protests is to impede these investigations. They don't want ICE to carry out their authority. They don't want ICE to deport anyone. So they're going to protest. And at every metric that they have in all of their protests, their goal is to disrupt, their goal is to disturb the peace, and their goal is to impede investigations conducted by ICE, who they report directly to the president. The people in this country have spoken. That's why he won the election. We want ICE to apprehend illegal immigrants. The protesters do not want that. That's what they're saying. They're saying down with ICE, goodbye ICE. We don't want ICE here.
I would argue that, like, I won't speculate on what the protesters want. I think there's a variety of different views on why people are protesting. What I would say is, regardless of the mission of ICE, we saw that the links that they're going to don't actually be gone to, and I would cite Obama. Obama had the most deportations in American history without using these tactics of utilizing memorandums, for example, to enter residences illegally without challenging American citizens for their IDs and using force to arrest them whenever they don't comply. There were many reasons. And just because you want to vote, I want to tackle this point, it was non-immigration. It does not give you consent to violate our laws. It gives you consent to enact your wills, but you still have to work within the constraints of our Constitution and our government. And I think the issue with ICE is that they're not doing that. And I think we see that through multiple court cases, multiple rulings.
Interesting that these court rulings are coming out, and this is why I have major contention with them, because you keep bringing up Obama and how he followed it, but the person who worked with Obama was Tom Homan. It's the same person that's working with the administration now. The same people who were doing. Go ahead.
No, sorry, I got nothing. Go ahead.
Yeah, the same people who were doing it back then are the same people who are doing it now. So when people say they disagree with all this, they have a leg to stand on. And again, I will go ahead and go out on that limb and say every single last one of these protests would stop if ICE wasn't existent. If ICE disbanded today, there would be no more ICE protests. That's their goal. They do not want ICE around. That's why every single sign that you see up there does not support, not a single one of those signs or posters that they have in these protests support ICE. Not a single one of the people out there are saying, we love ICE, keep doing your job. They're saying, no, we hate you, ICE. We don't want you to do their job.
I would say that Homan did serve me with Obama, and I would say that to Homan, I think he just follows the orders set in front of him. I actually don't blame Homan at all. Homan's been sued. Homan's lost lawsuits. Obama was sued. Obama won his lawsuits. I think that what Homan is enacting is a new type of immigration deportation methodology with a vast deployed federal government body that is just going to go. I'm going to quote door to door. But I know they're not really going door to door, right? And I think that's new. And with something new and novel, you're going to get court challenges. But again, I don't really care if their goal is to deport people that need to be deported. What I care about is again, if they're being effective, which I would argue via their own numbers they're not. And then I would also argue and this is also being weighed against like what we're almost spending $1 trillion on this operation, by the way. And I'd also argue that with their rights violations against Americans, I'm not even discussing the rights of immigrants and all those court cases, just the simple rights of Americans. I would argue that that's not an effective way. You can't have mass rights violations and then try to fall back and claim, well, the work we're doing is sure paying it off, boys, and be as though the American people have to settle for that. That would be an incorrect view of law enforcement.
Whose rights exactly are being violated?
It seems like a mixture per the courts, both U.S. citizens and migrants.
U.S. citizens. When we say this word, is there any point? Is there ever a point in time where any U.S. citizens' rights are suspended?
There are specific documents in our government to do that. Yes.
So there's a point in time where their rights could be suspended. Whereas they get due process. Does their due process look the same as a legal citizen here in the United States?
No.
So right there, when we say those things, I really have a hard time understanding what it means when everyone's rights are being violated, when at any moment in time, our rights can be suspended. And at any moment in time, their due process would never, it's never going to look like ours. It's never going to look that way. So when you say, hey, it's not lawful to break into someone's home forcibly if they have a lawful removal order, I feel like we have a leg to stand on when we contend with that argument, because their due process is the same as ours. So we can add even more bureaucracy onto that. And then you're going to turn around and say, well, your numbers don't look good. Well, I'm pretty sure our numbers would look a whole lot better if they were able to break into all these houses and violate all of those rights that you're claiming these illegals have.
Yeah, but I think that's like saying the police could seize more dope and pew pews if they could just stop and frisk everyone in the country. You know what I mean? Because like we do have court cases that say that illegals have a right to the Fourth Amendment's privacy, and that's why you have to obtain search warrants. We have cases like, for example, the Orlia versus Hyde case of 25, where the federal judge did rule, and it was actually upheld, I believe, in New England, that if ICE is detaining people, you have to give them bond hearings. They have a right to challenge their detentions. Now, they don't have a right to an attorney, but they have a right to challenge their detention. That was upheld, right? So that's a rights violation of a non-citizen that I could be discussing. But regardless, um, yeah, I mean, American citizens, I mean, they have rights to their residences. I'm gonna go back to that really quick. So I would agree with you. If we just let ICE kick in whatever door they want and go grab people, it would be incredibly efficient. But this would be a sacrificing of not just their rights, but our rights. And I'm not prepared to sacrifice my rights to the government unless they enact documents like Insurrection Act to suspend those rights. What the government has not. They've tried, right, with the Venezuelan Act, but they failed. The courts ruled against it. Said you can't use that, Mr. President, right?
And that they have every right to do so. I don't want to seem like I'm here in bad faith. Would you like to go to a specific case so it doesn't seem like we're going all around the world here?
Like a specific court case.
A specific example of them violating someone's rights to protest, because I feel like that's one that is extremely relevant, especially with what just happened recently.
Yeah, I could pull up Sarah Ellis's case with Greg Bovino when he lied about using force against peaceful protesters.
Okay, and I'd like to bring up the young man that was unalived when there were 4 agents on top of him.
Let's start with that one. That one's the newest one.
Yeah, I think it's a little relevant.
Yeah, we'll start there. We can work our way backwards. And AT-Bone, if you ever want to open up your panel or bell, just let us know. We can wrap
Yeah,
up.
so I was thinking, no, this is wonderful. I think you guys are doing amazing. I was just thinking, you guys want to take a break, a little water drink, or just take a 15-minute break and maybe have people ask questions. It's up to you on what you want.
Let it, if Young King agrees, I want to actually get through the conversation about the gentleman
Yeah.
who from yesterday, because I think
Yeah,
that's
let's talk about this
super
for like
fresh.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
perfect. No,
Okay,
no
yeah,
break,
stop at
no
7.
water break, no water break.
Now we good. We rolling. Hey,
All right,
if it stop us in like 10 or so minutes, and we'll take a breather.
Hey, it's
For people to
7
come
in
up.
the evening. It's way too late to drink water. I'll take a nice cold beer.
Bro, I'm gonna get one myself.
Perfect. Y'all got it. Go ahead.
So yeah, I'd argue that his rights weren't violated at all whatsoever, and I'd argue that when he was standing in the middle of the road and a car drove by him, he was impeding traffic. Strike one. Strike two, impeding an investigation from a federal officer. Strike three, putting his hand on a federal officer. I'd consider that assault. Strike four, not complying and resisting when they tried to detain him. And I'd argue that he put that other woman's life in danger as well, because he latched on her for his dear life and grabbed her with 2 arms to try to pull her as well. It took 4 men to get him to the ground. That's an example of resistance. He tanked pepper spray. That's another example of resistance. I don't think any of his rights were violated. And as a matter of fact, I think he fell victim to the rhetoric of the left. I'll go ahead and mute up with that being said.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue initially blocking the street is not a crime, especially if you're going to follow the direction of law enforcement to move. From what I saw, he was instructed to move. He did so. Whether the ICE agent or actually it was CPB believed that he was moving fast enough. I suppose that's up for debate. They were ushered off the road. I would argue, though, that that violations can shift. So, for example, and I'm going to get back to this. If an officer is engaging with you and they have a legal right to arrest you, then the right to be arrested does lie in the state. While in handcuffs, if the officer kicks you in the face, he has violated your rights. I know the investigation is ongoing, so I can only speak to what I saw. I have no definitive sourcing to pull from, but I would say if you're resisting arrest, but you're not presenting lethal force to the officers, and they disarm you by removing a pistol from your 6 o'clock waistband, and then another officer fires upon you, striking you in the back as you're unarmed, and by unarmed I mean not armed with lethal weapons. He was holding a phone at the time. I would argue they have violated your right because they violated your right to life by extinguishing that life without due cause, and due cause being the presentation of lethal force during the conflict. I'm not arguing he could never have went to jail for a crime. I'm arguing though that the CPP officers did violate him when they shot him unarmed.
And again, I'd contend with the fact that you said, hey, he wasn't doing anything wrong when he was standing in the middle of the street and cars were actually driving. So we know that you're actually not allowed to do that. It's not legal to do that, right?
Courts have ruled this would depend. I mean, if cars are getting around him, not exactly impeding them, and as long as he moves when requested, then it would not be a violation of the law.
So it's not a violation of the law to stand in the street when cars are driving. You don't think prosecutors will be able to demonstrate that in court? You don't think that holds up?
Because the police have lost court cases doing this, like street demonstrations and whatnot. Courts have held that as long as they're not blocking all flows of traffic, or as long as they abide by law enforcement commands when challenged, then it's not illegal. It's just a protest.
And I'm so glad you said abide to commands. What command did he abide to when he had to get pepper sprayed and dragged by 4 people? Did it look like he was complying to commands?
That wasn't about commands, though, Youuung. That was about the fact that the agent perceived that he was becoming aggressive whenever he stood between the agent and the woman, who I would argue the agent was even trying to arrest. But my main argument, though, here would be, regardless of what happened prior, that would give them the legal justification to arrest him. They violated his rights and took his life unjustifiably because he was unarmed and not presenting lethal force.
It would be easier to justify lethal force if you could demonstrate that he was violating laws. So I just fundamentally disagree with that. They would have a much harder time trying to justify using lethal force if the guy was sitting down on a bench, not talking at all, and if they tried to pull him off, they pulled him off with one man and didn't need to pepper spray him and didn't need 4 officers to try to get him to the ground. They would have a much easier job.
Youuung, do you believe it was justified? I just need to get like your very clear position.
100% justified. They're going to be able to justify that in court. And they've done it multiple times. You can bring up cases where, officers have lost, and I can bring up cases, where officers have won. Not only can I bring up cases where officers have won, I can bring up cases where regular citizens have won as well. When they start violating laws, so they violate this law, then they violate this command, then they refuse to comply. Lethal force is usually justified when all those requirements are met. Usually it's more than one. And in this case, it's about 4 to 7.
But you would need to articulate peril. So like, for example, in the Daniel McKnight case, he was fired upon by officers, but that's because he delivered multiple punches, knocking both of them unconscious. And whenever one of them started regaining consciousness, Mr. Knight was still advancing on the officers to beat them more. And so they put 2 in his chest, and I think he expired. But that was ruled justifiable because he had rendered them unconscious. And so his advance could render them unconscious again, which subjects their weapons to be taken, blah, 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 blah. In this case, the force was removed from him, and he wasn't actually being physically violent. Yes, he was not putting his hands behind his back, but they were balled up underneath him. And he was presenting no other force because other officers had his wrist and were grabbing them. If he had reached for a knife, or if he had another weapon, which we know he didn't for force, because other officers had his wrist and were grabbing them, or if he had another weapon, which we know he didn't for DHS, then sure, this might be a good justified unaliving. But the issue is they fired at him in the back, not fleeing. Not sure, this might be a good justified unaliving. But the issue in the back, not fleeing, not a danger to the public, not endangering other officers through his resistance. I would say that this is an unjustifiable unaliving just based on those facts, those counterfacts, I guess I could say.
And all those counterfacts completely ignore every fact of what happened before, the preceding behavior. So when you say, yeah, they pew-pewed him in the back, they did use lethal force, and it was on his back, but you keep saying he didn't use any force to go against them. And I really want to contend with that because it took 4 of them to pull him away, and they pepper sprayed him first. So the justification they're going to use is, hey, we pepper sprayed this guy. We use non-lethal force. And I'd also add the fact that, hey, if you carry, you know what we do when we're in class, what they tell us. You need to let the officers know that you're carrying. I didn't want to hear him say, hey, I'm carrying. So that's 1. 2, they're going to be able to justify it because he didn't say that. So he's hiding the fact that he was carrying. Not only are they going to use that to try to justify the lethal force, they're going to use the lethal force justification because they needed the force of 4 grown men to subdue this guy. They needed the force of pepper spray to try to subdue this guy. And none of that worked. If any of that had worked, he would have been in handcuffs. He would have been detained, the situation guy. They needed the force guy. And none of that worked because he would have been detained. The situation would have been solved. So when they start to say these things in court, it's going to sound like it's very justified, honestly. But yeah, like I said, we say, yeah, he didn't use any force. He wasn't doing anything. That's not really the case. It took 4 people to move him against his will. His will was to go one way.
But I think you have to remember, though, that we already have court cases. So, for example, like Graham v. Connor of 89 would say that he has to be posing an imminent threat to the officers, which there was no imminent threat. They removed the lethal force. Because I think, again, if we're going to do this legally, the legal justification for using unaliving force on an individual is that they pose imminent danger to officers or the community. The severity of his arrest was low. The resistance that he was giving was low. He was not giving them his wrist. And there were 6 agents that had thrown him to the ground. They rushed over. And I want to be very mindful. Those 6 agents came over because they were also detaining the other 2 women. So they weren't all for him. They had transferred over to him when the agent in the gray had discovered the weapon. And they're grabbing his wrist, they're grabbing his legs, and they're trying to put him in handcuffs. But they're missing one key element to use lethal force, and it's imminent danger. If they're not in imminent danger, courts have held time and time and time again that law enforcement cannot fire. That is Supreme Court level on multiple cases.
Yeah, and when we use cases, you keep bringing up other cases to demonstrate the counter to this case, right? So I'm going to bring up a case that's going to also help, the officers out. So I bring up a case where we had a man like George Zimmerman who was able to use lethal force, even though the threat wasn't imminent that he was going to lose his life. So there are cases where people didn't think their life was going to end, and they used lethal force, and they still didn't. They had a justified unaliving. There's more than one case where you justify lethal force without actually being able to prove that your life was going to end.
Well, but the difference though here is that in Zimmerman's case, he was found not guilty because the jury was being told that Trayvon Martin had slammed him on the ground and he had struck his head and he had feared being rendered unconscious, which put him in a fear of losing his life. And he existed in a stand your ground state, which I mean, conveying the threat.
Federal agents are going to say we tried non-lethal force, we tried non-lethal tactics.
But you're missing the key thing though.
And he didn't let us know that he was carrying. So not only did he resist,
that doesn't work. They removed the weapon. That doesn't work. He was only shot after the weapon was removed from his back.
And it absolutely works because he resisted before hiding that fact.
That also doesn't work. I'm saying, like, so per your counter, it doesnn't work. Zimmerman was excused because they demonstrated that Trayvon Martin assaulted him. But you can't prove to me that this man assaulted these ICE agents.
Yes, you can. He put his hands on the agent.
I think he grabbed the. No, I don't think he put his hands on him. Actually, no, I don't believe that. I have to watch the video. No, I don't think it actually happened.
100% did.
Because I saw him with his hands up. He had one hand up and he's being maced.
Yeah, you're just wrong on that. He put his hands right on the officer's chest. That's why the officer started to apprehend him.
I will look into this.
Like you said, he was not worried about him. He pushed that lady on the ground. Then Buddy came in like a white knight and put his hand directly on the agent's chest.
Yeah, I would also argue that during his original detention, I believe it also to be unlawful to strike him in the face with a mace can. Law enforcement cannot use improvised impact weapons that are not suited for, impact, like a baton or an asp. And again, the face being a red zone for law enforcement, this is federal universal, that's a lethal force zone. It's one thing, again, if he's fighting with an officer, like by punching, right, these would be stand your ground or self-defense claims I would be able to accept. But just him being on the ground with his hands balled up as a weapon's being removed from, again, his 6 o'clock just doesn't reach.
You're balled up to assault another officer, so you already assaulted one. So when your hands
I don't think he did, but neither DHS is claiming that.
On the ground. It's reasonable people are going to be like, oh wow.
But not even DHS is claiming that. We can't claim that either. The DHS is not claiming that the officer was assaulted. They're claiming that he was obstructionary and a terrorist. But they're not claiming that he assaulted anyone. And I would also like to say that it can't be, and actually it's not acceptable. Again, imminent threat. If I push an officer, the officer can't just he can't just mad dump. This would not be use of force congruent. It's not imminent. I can probably be maced. I could be tased. I can't be mag dumped. There's a big gray zone between non-lethal and lethal force, and there's a bridge you have to build to get over that gray zone. And that bridge is typically built on imminent threat or the fear of loss of life. If the agent wants to say, well, he pushed my arm or grabbed my arm, so I feared to lose my life, that's fine. But why didn't he shoot him then? Why did he wait 15 seconds later until we're on the ground and we see the weapon come out of his waistband by another officer that he's looking at to then mag dump him then? That's another issue. You can't mag dump somebody 30 seconds later and claim you're in fear for your life when there's 6 of your buddies on top of them, wrestling them on the ground. Because you're not in imminent danger anymore. You weren't then, you're not now. So why are we pulling the trigger?
Everything you just said is speculation. But I did say 7 o'clock, so I will stop. I will concede my time.
Bell, you got it. We're going on mute.